Like a lot of you, I'm assuming, my experience of being alive has led me to the conflicting experiences of learning to trust the world deeply and the people in it, and run kicking and screaming away from them, hiding myself in fear that I will ultimately be rejected and alone, sometimes in the same day. One experience that led me to deeply trust in the love and care of other humans was once when I got injured on the road in Boston when I lived there during seminary. I rode a bike to my classes every day. We had one car in my family at the time, and as I was coming down the road on the way home from a long day in seminary classes, a thing happened to me that bike riders refer to in cities as getting doored. It's a good name because it's really accurate. As you're riding your bike, someone opening their car door opens it just in front of you before you have time, and you get doored. I was coming down a hill and going really fast, and I didn't have time to see the door open in front of me, and I hit the door and flew over a car and woke up on the sidewalk, luckily wearing a helmet. I woke up on the sidewalk, and in front of me were 4 men, chefs at a Chinese restaurant, who had found me lying on the road. They were huddled over me, talking, and I couldn't understand them, but they each had cold cans of Sprite that they were putting on my face in different places, doing the best they knew how in the moment, and I was grateful. I didn't know these guys' names. I couldn't remember how I had gotten there in the moment. But here were these strangers huddled on top of me, speaking a language I couldn't understand and rubbing my face with Sprite cans. I got up and I was shaken and shocked and thanked them and got back on my bike a little dazed and went home. Looking back, I realized I probably should have gone to the doctor. But in that moment, it occurred to me that I was not ashamed for needing help. I wasn't ashamed that I had made a mistake or been driving too close to the cars. I didn't find myself feeling stupid or foolish. I just knew that I needed help. And that someone who did not owe it to me, who did not know my name or speak my language, just showed up to do it. If grace is a gift that you don't necessarily earn, then that was grace. Imperfect and odd, and me waking up on a sidewalk in my bicycle helmet. But the thing about that moment, as much as I didn't feel ashamed for needing help, I didn't feel stupid or embarrassed for being vulnerable, I didn't blame myself for having a human body and hitting a car door, as much as all those things felt good and right, these people were strangers. I never had to see them again, and it was relatively easy to be okay with needing help because my masks got pulled away from me by thieves. Like in the Gibran reading today, I didn't have a choice. My body hit the car and then the concrete, and I needed help. But in the vast majority of my days, I don't like needing help. And I don't like making mistakes, and I'm embarrassed by it, and it fills me with shame or anger or the desire to run away and hide because most of the people I interact with aren't strangers. And after they see my faults, I have to see them again. When I was getting a theater degree in college, sometimes we would do mask work. And I found that I have a really hard time, and especially did at that time, being silly or moving in really odd and embarrassing and silly ways in front of a crowd because I really like you to think I'm cool. Even more so then. And so what I found is that as an actor, it was really hard for me to play any roles where I didn't get to have a lot of control and look good. It was, however, easier to do the things that were silly or embarrassing or vulnerable when I had a mask over my face. In fact, it became really fun because you couldn't see me. And I think a lot of our day-to-day life looks a lot more like that than graciously accepting help on the roadside. I wonder what lessons you have learned about whether or not you can trust other people, or whether you can trust God. Whether when the mask falls off and you've made a mistake, an important one, you're not smart or healthy or good as you thought you were or you pretended to be. When the mask falls away, what lessons have you learned about whether or not something or someone will still be there to hold you? Now, I get why a lot of us go through the world hiding behind something. For a lot of people and populations, hiding has meant survival. For a lot of queer or trans folks, for people who have had to pass when it comes to race or culture, or for any number of reasons of vulnerable populations and people, hiding behind some sort of mask has sometimes literally meant the difference between life and death. Community or loneliness, love or betrayal, employment or poverty. I get why a lot of us would hide. I also know how uncomfortable it makes me when I meet someone who likes to tell me that they're really into radical authenticity and honesty. It's just who I am, they say. I tell it like it is. Do you really want to hang out with that person for too long? Not me. Often that persona is a mask itself. There's a nun, Sister Joan Chittister, who talks about what I think I'm really meaning today, which is the spiritual narcissism of being preoccupied with how good we're getting it, or not. She says that often what we do is we live inside these often unspoken, implicit ideals that none of us really ever live up to in our roles or our relationships, what it means for me to be a dad or a minister, a friend or a citizen. We all just kind of go around pretending like we're living up to them, secretly knowing that none of us are, and spending our lives on this checklist of what we got right and what we didn't, what others are getting right and what they didn't. And it's a game that never ends, and everybody loses. Everybody loses. And what happens, the impact of playing that game, is that the real you, never comes in contact with the actual world. In the only life that we know you have. I think our culture and this moment that we're in as a people sends very conflicting messages about the risks and rewards of vulnerability and authenticity. On this post-July 4th weekend, it made me think about one of those almost sacred American values, which is standing up and speaking your mind and being yourself. It feels like it's written into the fabric of who we are as a nation, so much so that it takes on a religious tone. Be yourself, stand up, say what you believe, and be who you are. And we know that that is not accepted most of the time. Our culture tells you, you are special, you are unique, be who you are, say who you are, and then when you do, you often find out that what your family didn't mean was to tell them that you were gay. It didn't mean to tell them what you actually believe about God or politics. We didn't really want to know your faults. We want to know who you are, just not who you are. You know that scene in Charlie Brown where Lucy always promises him that when he goes to kick the football, she will leave it there? And every single time he goes to kick it and falls and lands flat on his back because she has taken away her promise. How often do the cultures that we inhabit, progressive spiritual culture especially, say, it's okay, be who you are, tell us, admit your vulnerability, let down the mask, ask questions and doubt. What did you say? We didn't mean that. Sometimes it feels more like a trick And we learn not to trust the world or others or God or life. In progressive culture right now, I feel like we are dealing with this creative tension between vulnerability and accountability and trying to figure out a world in which both of those things coexist at the same time. The same reading group or church can have Brene Brown at one point saying, "It's okay, vulnerability is your strength, authenticity and honesty let down the mask," and then cancel and call out culture on the other side says, "A tweet that you sent in 2008 means it's over for you." Which one do we choose? On the extremes, neither seems to work. And I watch religions and denominations and industries trying to wrestle with the fact that people have to be held accountable for harm, and how to do that and live with a sense of deep and transformative grace in the world too. That when we watch how people are treated in community, we learn that there is something that will hold us, not that nothing or no one can be trusted. And whether it is the person crying out for accountability, saying, "I have been harmed, something has to happen," or the person saying, "I've just made a mistake, can I still do this with you?" It feels like both are coming out of a place of saying, "I don't yet know if I can trust the world. I don't yet know if there's a reality that will hold me." And I feel like in that creative tension, it's often really easy to default to the least charitable understanding of human interactions possible. The one that says, "You get what you deserve. And so will I." And secretly, I'm really afraid of that. There's a woman named Nadia Bowles-Weber. She is a minister. You may not know her if you're not in the progressive church circles. She is a Lutheran pastor who's covered in tattoos, a former addict who was the minister of a really unique congregation. She curses a lot. And recently she interviewed Lance Armstrong in public. She started the interview by saying, and I'm going to paraphrase her because some of the language isn't as church appropriate for me. She said, "Hey, Lance, I heard you did some drugs you weren't supposed to and then lied about it. I've done that so many times." There was this audible gasp in the room when she did, because people didn't seem to understand how you could just say that. There was a big reaction in some of the progressive religious community about that. Some saying, "That's the most wonderful expression of grace I've ever seen." And some saying, "Don't you know he hurt people? Don't let him off the hook." But the fact that it provoked a reaction, no matter what I think about it, is a little proof that we just don't know how to do this yet. How to look with clear eyes at our faults and others, and how to believe that our worst mistakes don't define us. And I don't know if our progressive culture is doing a good job at holding the middle. Religion, too, sends mixed messages. In the same congregation, in the same faith tradition, in the same scripture, almost in the same breath, God can be described as ultimately loving and punishing. For fundamentalists and New Agers alike. The fundamentalist church of my youth would tell me that God loved me deeply, but if I didn't please God, I would suffer forever, which didn't make sense to me. But there's also a New Age understanding of God or the universe that says we're all held in an energy of light, but if you don't think positively enough, you're going to get cancer. You've heard that too. That reality can't be trusted either. It's not always for us. Think of the story of Adam and Eve in the Bible, the first story where human beings show up and they are scared of being seen. They finally get a little wisdom and knowledge. They do something they weren't supposed to do, but it was probably set up that way anyway. Why else would the tree be there? They eat the fruit. They immediately realize that they're naked, and they feel shame. They go and they hide, and the God whose name is Yahweh, who in this text walks through the cool breeze in the morning in the garden, is looking for them and can't find them. And when it finally does, they say, well, we were scared. We were naked and we didn't want you to see us. I love the response that God says. Yahweh responds back, who told you you were naked? Who told you that? In this church, we don't ask whether those stories are true. We ask what's true about them. And the first story someone chose to insert in the edited version is about humans who are scared out of their pants about being seen. I didn't want you to see me. Our Universalist heritage that came before this congregation and formed us pointed right to that question and in ways that were very difficult for people. The Universalists claimed that God loved you and there was nothing you could do about it. Nothing you could do about God's love. A tent revival where they would say, God loves you and there's nothing you can do about it. You're going to heaven and you're predestined to go there. Go home. Everything's fine. Which sounds nice, but people started asking the question, how am I supposed to make meaning in the world if that's true? The people who have wronged me deeply or hurt me in violent ways. How am I supposed to be a judge of moral character if there's nothing to hide from God and people cosmically do not get what they deserve? It was so radical at the time that Universalists were barred from serving on some juries in the United States. How do I make meaning if people don't get what they deserve? What if there's nothing to hide and no mask to be worn from God? See, what I think is at stake in these questions, what do I do with my mistakes? What happens if you see me? I think what's at stake is the question, can I fundamentally trust being alive? Are you at home? At home, really at home, not the fake you. Not the you with your degrees and you with your book smarts, not the you that presents yourself to your boss or your spouse or your friends. The real, unvarnished you. Are you at home in this world? And can you trust God and the world and someone to hold you if the mask came off? What is your experience of the world teaching you about that? There have been moments when I have been deeply forgiven or held in grace after I messed up, really messed up. I wonder if you can point to those experiences in your life, if you can think of a moment where someone saw you as you are and had loving eyes. That's salvific. That's grace. That's an experience of knowing that if the mask came off, you would be at home in this body and in this earth. That is the grace of God expressed in a human form. And I hope that you have known that at least once. Hopefully every day. But it's rarer than we'd like to think. In a culture, both religious and in our nation, that teaches these mixed messages, the idea that if you let the mask drop, something would still hold you, that has to be taught and practiced. Because it just doesn't come naturally, strangely enough. That Philip Booth poem that we read today in worship is one in which grace is taught by experience, and I love it. That parent holding a child in the sea, trying to convince her that if she lets go, the ocean will hold her. I love the realism in his voice. He tells her that there will be thrashing. And he doesn't pretend that she won't have fear in her heart. At some point she will. But she can't fake it. You can't fake floating. You either do or you don't. And the only way floating works is to let go. If you fight it, you sink. He rightly tells her that a dead man's float is face down. And that the only one where you survive is the one where we see your face and it is kissed by the sun. Lie back, daughter, and the sea will hold you. What a tremendous lesson. The fact is that whether you're a parent or friend or a spouse, someone is learning whether or not the sea will hold them because of you. We rarely learn the important lessons from strangers or by reading a book or some abstract thought experiment. Yeah, those people protected me on the roadside and tried to take care of me, but after that experience, it was kind of gone, and they didn't help me trust other people in my life. The real lessons about whether or not someone will love you and hold you happens in these intimate, everyday ways. And I'm not talking about a world where there's no boundaries, a world where there's no accountability. I'm not talking about the world where you sometimes don't end a marriage or lose your job. I'm talking about a world in which the marriage can end and there's still grace. In which you lose your job and there's still grace. In which you're incarcerated and there's still grace. My guess is you have learned whether or not the sea will hold you by listening to others. By hearing how they talk about other people and their mistakes. By seeing who they shun and who they keep. And someone is learning that very same lesson just by listening to you. One of the most important and precious spiritual tasks we ever get to hold is whether or not our life will be tangible evidence of what some call God's grace. Whether when someone encounters us, they encounter a reality that says if the mask falls, and it will, something and someone will still be there to hold you when your face lies up and is kissed by the sun. May your life be that for so many people. Amen.